All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar. We're going to go over uh, cuelist editing playback. The idea of this one is we're going to be working in a single cuelist. Later on, we'll be in other webinars. We're going to do more with multiple cuelists, but the real focus on this one is how you work in a single cuelist and play it back, kind of a theatrical style programming and playback. So without further ado, we'll get started. So the first thing here is I've created a cue list already with some stuff in it. I'm going to go through some of the ways that I would play this back or set up the console for this first before we come back into the cue list. So we're going to kind of go, we're going to start at the end and work our way and then go to the beginning and come back and forth here a little bit. So first off, I'm going to take us over to the console screen. So in the console screen, we have an EX console, virtual EX console. And this section over here on the right-hand side is called the super playback. It's also a programmer, so as anyone who's used this console already knows, when they grab fixtures in the programmer, this is where if you have this console, you can use the encoders to do the different items that it does. Another way you can use this area is for a playback, a master playback. So in this case, you'd hit the menu button, and then you get some other options here where I can set it back to the IPCG mode or playback. And actually, if I hit the menu button twice, a second time after I've already pressed it, it automatically cycles to the other way of the other mode, which is the playback mode. So right now, I see that because I have this cue list open in the editor, my Ben show cue list, I have access to it on the playback right here. And when I have it in here, I can play through my cues. I can see the things happen. So if you're working in a single cue list, theatrical style programming, and you want the big go button, this is the way you'd get to it. This is the way you'd have it. And in here, we also have our skip to the forward and skip to back keys as well. Again, on an EX console, we have this screen, and there's this other little button that many people ask what it does, is this one right here with the 4 arrows. This expands this screen a bit, so it's going to show me a few more cues in here. So if you have this dock window here docked to the bottom of your screen above your EX console, you can see that, and you can expand that out a little bit. On the other consoles, the Super Playback, here's an S3. Super Playback is on the right-hand side. It's very similar. It works exactly the same way. You still have a menu button, and you can go into Playback here. And right now I have no cue list selected, so it's not going to let me, it's not going to have anything at the moment. S1 has a super playback. It's kind of split. We've got the encoders over here, but we've got the playback buttons on this side. One thing that was brought up in the past is we have on these older consoles, we have 2 play buttons. That's kind of a throwback to the old Vista 1 days where this button used to do something different. Right now, they both do the exact same thing, but you're free to change this action on this button by grabbing a cuelist button action from here, and you can drag it and drop it onto the button. So something like jump, I could put that there, and that would fire my jump action. So it's an open button. There actually is another blank button here that has never had any use, but again, that's on the S3 and S1 consoles. And finally, on the MV, for a console like this, we don't have a super playback. However, we can make a super playback out of this by combining playbacks on the MV. And to do that, we'd right-click on the screen, and we'd say expand horizontally. And what that does is now we have 2 faders and 4 buttons or 6 buttons that all correspond with whatever's in this window here. So if I were to put my show on there, and actually I'm going to expand this one more time. Now I'm going to 3 faders and buttons. I could lay these other actions on top of these other buttons. So basically I've given myself all the same physical things that I have on a EX console for playback controls on an MV console. So again, if this is if you want to have a pseudo super playback on just an MV, it's easy to do this here. So moving back to our EX, we're going to spend the time in the EX just playing with the EX for this one, just because it's the newest one, and we like to show off the newest things. So now we've seen how we can use the super playback on the EX. And I'm going to drop my cue list on here too. This way I can see what's happening here. So another thing here too is while I'm in this, when we're in super playback mode, these faders correspond with, by default, correspond with the same as the intensity fader if I'm on a regular normal playback. So I have an intensity. I also have a crossfade channel here too, which lets me crossfade between the cues as I move the fader. It's similar to the shuttle, but it's more of a physical fader to go up and down for that. And if you don't like that, you could come in here and you could add a blank action to that and get rid of it. So just some other options on how you can run your show. Okay, so moving back into the cue list that I began programming earlier. So I started playing with this earlier to come up with some ideas on what I would do if I were going to run this show as a single cue list. Looking back at some of the other webinars we did, I'm doing the same things that we've already seen. So I created cues, I added in my looks, just did some general things. And one thing what I'll do is when I'm programming cues, I'll probably start with getting my basic looks in there, and then I'll come back through and I'll adjust timings because I want to get my main looks down, and then I tweak the way they're going. And I have to look here. I know there's a cue here that I did something that had a little staggered timing here. So this one right here. So Q3, I have a couple things going on. So when I originally created the look, all this timing was exactly the same. So what I did in this one is I took and I just changed my fade up and fade down times a touch so that these fixtures would come on before these went off. So it wasn't quite as much of a dip in it. That's the only change I made to this. But this is just something that I'll go through and I'll tweak after I create the basic looks. I'll move on to my next cue. So what I've done is I've kind of thought of this as these first 5 cues are my opening number of the show. And then I have a blackout here. And in my blackout, maybe the timing's a little slow. I don't really like that. I have a blackout, but then I have a move in black cue after this. This move in black cue is to reposition the fixtures to come up to this new position here. So I'm not going to mess with that too much. However, we do want to look at this blackout. And this, as was talked about yesterday with the blocking cues, here's a perfect example of why a blocking cue is very handy, especially for blackouts. So in my blackout right now, it's the intensity of these 39 fixtures go out. This is what I've programmed. This is what I like. If I move to a previous cue and I decide, you know what, I need to add some fixtures, and I'm going to kick over to here, and we're going to turn on the blues in this cue. Because Vista's tracking, it's going to continue to stay on until I tell it to go off, including through my blackout here that I wanted it to stay a blackout, but I forgot about that. So one way of doing it is I could go back to this blackout that's just as is and grab those fixtures again and turn them off. A better way of doing this, oops, I don't want to go back that far. A better way of doing this is turning this blackout into a block cue. So in that case, I would go and I'd do block or control B. And what this does is this makes sure that this look that I'm doing will always remain this look. So no matter what I do beforehand or after that, or well, not so much after, whatever I do before this cue is going to stop right here and it's not going to continue on. So then if I were to go back to these cues and I take those fixtures again and bring them on and play through. Now, honestly, I might not want those to stay on that long, but I'm going to do it for this example. Now, because I made this blackout that block cue with everything there, the fixtures went off and I'm good to go. So this is where a block cue can be helpful in blackouts. It's probably my go-to for a block cue. Now, what I've done is with doing this move in black cue after this happens automatically. The move in black, what it's doing is it's repositioning my lights so when I come up in the next cue, they're ready to go. So block and move in black are separate items. I could have put these move in black items, this move in black queue, into the previous queue if I wanted to. I decided not to because I like having my move in black events separate, which means I can see them in the timeline. When you do a move in black queue and you put these events in the previous queue, you may or may not be able to see them in the previous queue or adjust them. So having them in their own queue is handy. Plus you can see the status of what's happening because this queue plays like any other queue. Speaking of moving black, I want to go back to the beginning of this whole queue list. So, something else here that I'm looking at is, when I play my first queue, these fixtures are moving out to this position. So I might not want them to do that. I might want them to be in that position ahead of time. So in that case, I would make another move in black queue for this one as well. So, and because I'm at the beginning of the queue list, I don't have the option to select an existing queue. I can only create a new queue list or a new queue. So in that case, I'm going to say okay. So now, when I play this queue list, it's going to first go in the move in black queue, and then it's going to stop and it's going to wait. So now I know that my stuff's ready to go. It also made this a follow queue automatically. It doesn't mean anything if you're starting from scratch with this queue, if this is the first queue of your entire show. It's only going to matter if you go to the end queue here and you're set in your queue list properties to play back to the beginning, then it's going to automatically play this queue. So you may want this to be a halt queue if you did something like this so that it doesn't automatically play. In that case, I just click on the little header there and then change it to halt. And now it's going to sit there and it's going to wait. And I could have done that when I created the queue, the move in black too. I could have set it as a halt instead, but I didn't. I just kept going. So actually, let me go back through here and play this again. They should be in their positions. And for some reason, they're not in their positions. So I might have not done something properly for that. All right, so moving on to a next little item here. This is a little trick in programming that I like to do a lot of times, mainly because it helps without having to adjust things. So in this queue right here, oops, that's not the screen I want. That's the screen I want. All right, so in this queue right here, I have these fixtures in this position. They are in, this one is in the band position, and this one is in the front position. So something you can do is, and because I use presets and I use move in black, I can change the position in this main queue and it's going to automatically update what's happening in the move in black queue. So let's say I didn't want that to be in the front position. Which one did I want? I had an idea here when I started doing this. It's like I have this great idea of how I want this to look. So I want to start this in the up position instead. So now that I've done that, I can go back here, and if I play in the move in black, you can see everybody's moving. And they're already in the up position. And those go up too. So here's something that's a little different with what I'm going to do with this demonstration. So let's say I have those fixtures in the up position. I want them to start in the up position, but I want them to fade back down to the stage. So because this is moving black on theirs, I can't do that, at least not in this way. What I'd have to do is I actually have to put a new hard event in this queue beforehand. So in this case, what I'll do is I'm going to put them in the up position here in this queue. And actually, let me get in here and do this. So now I can see I've overwritten the move in black. Let me zoom in a little bit. That's probably really hard to see. There we go. So beforehand, these were move in black, and now they're the up position. This is great if I'm doing this as a preset, but let's say I wanted to dial this in and I'm trying to hit like very specific things or something like that, and I'm not using a preset because I'm being lazy. But when the fixtures are off, I can't see where this is, and I don't necessarily want to program intensity. I don't want to turn these on in this queue just so I can see this, because if I forget to take them back out, then I'm stuck with this fixture on. So here's the thing where I like to go is I like to turn on highlight. And this is where highlight can be very handy, because now I can turn on highlight, select all the fixtures, and I can see what's going on. However, back in the timeline, I'm not going to see any intensity on this cue because highlight is not actually putting it into the programmer. So this is very handy. Highlight function for something like this is very handy for you being able to see what's supposed to happen in those fixtures when they're dark. So in this case, let's say I wanted to dial that up a little bit farther and maybe do a little, kind of drag these pans out a little bit like that. Yeah. So now that I've done all that, I can turn highlight back off, and the fixtures will be in those positions, and they'll do their thing when they come back down. So it's very handy to do that type, to use and highlight for that type of thing. And for some reason, it didn't like anything I just did. I like using highlight like that. While I'm still on here, so one other thing I'm doing is I'm using the space bar to go through stuff. When a cuelist is open for editing, the space bar acts as a go command, and that is in a user preference in here as well. Oops. I've lost it.
It's a playback tab.
Playback, yes, that's right. Thank you, there we go. Yeah, so spacebar acts as a play on open cue list. So this is a handy thing to have. This was added here. Now, if it's not working, you make sure it's turned on. It is on by default. So when I go through things, I can play it back through here. So actually, I think I have just now realized what I did wrong on this cue list. So now I'm going to correct it because it's going to drive me up the wall. What is most likely happening is that there is a hidden move in black event behind this. There it is. So it didn't override the move in black automatically. It left it as a hidden event behind there. So if I'm doing multiple things like that, I can get myself in trouble if I did certain things. So what I could do is I could remove the move in black for everything and start with putting hard values and just moving these certain fixtures. I'm going to unmark current fixtures. I can also select the fixtures and unmark them there. And now I'm going to go back to my up position on that. And this should work the way I want it to do. Come on. Tell you what, I'm going to unmark the entire queue just to make sure what's going on. There we go. Now I got all kinds of fun things happening. Oh yeah, there they are. They're on the right. There we go. They are doing it right. I think I'm looking at the wrong fixtures. So anyway, the example there was actually using highlight to be able to turn things on when they're in the move in black queue. So I can see, and actually it's handy to then verify that you're using the right presets on this stuff as well. All right. So now that I've done this, couple other ways of programming, and because we're using a single cue list for this whole show, I'm going to show how we can record and do things to this cue list using the command line as well. So down here at the bottom is, because this cue list is open for editing, it's automatically the cue list that's selected in the command line. If I close this, save and release it, it's still here because it's the only cue list I have right now. Let's put another one on here. This selection down here will follow what my selection is when I select a cue list in this screen. So right now, if I were to decide to store a queue from the command line, it would store it to this one. and now here it's going to store it to this one. And then again, if I open up one of these, if I open up the looks, it's going to automatically assume that you want to record to the cue list that you're using, or the cue list that's open for editing. So some of the things you can do in the command line is you can store directly to the cue list. So if you're doing this in a, actually I'm going to close this. If you're using this in a theater setting and you're just doing dimmers, I could go in and I can say, grab some fixtures and turn them on. And I'm doing this right now in live. And using the command line, I can use S for store and say I'm going to store. And because I'm trying to point my screen, not use my mouse. Because I'm still in this cue list, if I knew what cue I wanted to store to, I could say store Q10. I'm going to skip a bunch. And what happens is it's going to open up the store window, the store events window. And at this point, I don't have to do anything. I can just say OK, and it will store that cue. One of the nice things about the command line in Vista, and let me open up a keypad window here real quick. Whoa, that's massively big. I'm going to shrink her down a touch. So the keypad in Vista is the command line input for this. So what I was doing is I'm using a keyboard shortcut, and there is a command line document on our website that shows what the keyboard shortcuts are for all these things. So for example, S is store, and then I'd say store, and then Q11, enter. Actually, I'm going to actually make a change before I do something like that. Take that out, bring this up. Store Q11, enter. Again, it's going to open the window. I can hit OK or press enter again, and it'll go away. One of the nice things with the command line in Vista is that it's kind of syntax agnostic. So what I mean by that is I could say Q12 store, and it's going to give me the same exact result. So I don't have to worry about saying, oh, I won't go through this and start typing in this command and then realize that I've typed it in wrong and it gives me an error at the end of it. So it's totally possible to do things bi-directionally in here. Also with the command line, I can do things where I'm changing the times. So we're going to open up this list again so we can see the times change. So for example, let's go to, I'll do Q4. So I'm in Q4. I could say Q for time 5. And now it's going to change that time. I can also do the split times in here. So just like a lot of other consoles that use command line, I can do store, end time, and stat commands in here together. I can also use split times. So if I wanted to say Q for time 5, 8, it's going to give me a split time of 5 seconds up and 8 seconds down. And then other things I can do is I can label them in here as I go. So I could say label Q4, enter. It's going to pop up with my rename, and I could say big. So the command line is helpful for doing things like that. In order for me to rename in the cues themselves, I can do it. I can double click on there and type in delete and type in the names. Or if I'm sitting on the command, if I'm sitting anywhere in Vista, label corresponds with L. So I could say L Q4 and bigger. So the command line can help you with some of those simple operations like that. Also in here, we can actually get in here and adjust the times of different parameters as well. So again, if I wanted to say, let's see, let me make sure there's something in these cues that I'm doing this to. That works. Okay, so I could say Q3. Holding down the Alt key on your keyboard changes what these do. So this can now become, using the number pad, I can say I'm going to do intensity, position, color, gobo, things like that. I can also hit the function key here and do that. So using this keypad on a touch screen actually can work out quite nicely. But Q3, I can say position time of 5, enter. And now it's going to, the queue time is 2 seconds still, but actually the queue time is now 5 seconds, but the position is now 5 seconds while everything else is in 2 seconds. So I can get in here and do all this stuff. So again, if you're programming a single cue list on a theatrical style show and you're used to typing in numbers to save and bring your levels up and down, you can. And speaking of bringing levels up and down, I'm going to close this out. We're just going to sit here in the, just in live for a moment. With the command line, fixtures 1 through 10. And I'm going to do this all with the mouse just so you can see exactly what I'm doing rather than using my keyboard. Some of the shortcuts in here is if I hit @ obviously I can type in a level, and this is going to give me my intensity. If I do @ twice, it's a quick key to full. I can also recall presets by doing this. So in this case, I have a red preset of 101. So if I say fixtures 1 through 10, preset 101, it's going to tell me, hey, there's my red preset. And when I go enter, boom, there they are. Also from here, I can clear out what I'm doing. So again, @ enter shortcut will clear that stuff out. So if I wanted to clear out that color again, I could say do the fixtures 1 through 10 at color, enter. And that's going to remove that color from there. So we will be doing more about command line. This is sort of just to whet the appetite on the command line here. And it ties into how you do things while doing super playback and programming in a single cue list. So moving on, another ways of playing this cue list back is our playback screen. And in our playback screen on the left-hand side, we're going to see, depending on what the view options are, and I'll show that in a minute, depending on what our view options are, we'll see every cue list that's in our show in a long list here. And on the right-hand side, we see each cue that's in that list. This screen also lets you play back these cues directly. So in this show, if I created a list of, like this one says, multiple looks, these don't necessarily have to be all based on each other. They can just be random looks that we have put together that we want to play back. And I can do that by hitting the play buttons in here and bounce through things. So that's a way of playing back individual cues if you decide. Another way of playing another way of looking at this is also filtering out what we're looking at in these windows. So right now I'm going to see every cue list that's in here. In the view menu, we have some options of different ways of what we're seeing. So first option is active cue lists only. Everything just disappeared. And that's because nothing is currently playing out here. If I play back one, I'm going to play back from here. Now I'm going to see, I see a single cue list. I bring this up because this is a way that if for some reason you're in a playback screen and you've lost all your cue lists, it could be that show active cue list only is on so that you can't see them. So there are things here as follow on go and follow on select. I'm going to turn that off for a moment. What that means is that what this part of the window here is going to show you is going to follow whatever the last cue list that you hit go on. So we're going to do this. I'm going to do that and that real quick so I can undock this. Hopefully make that stay over there. And follow and go is turned on. So when I press go on this cue list, it's going to show me that one. When I press go on this cue list, it's going to show me that one. So again, if you're using a single cue list show, or maybe you have some other cue lists that play in the background for some other things, if follow on go is on, it's always going to bounce to the one that you've got there. The other option is follow on select. And that works the same way you'd think. When I hit the select button, it's going to show me whatever cuelist is selected at that time. So if you're on a single cuelist show, you want to have that one selected all the time. I could still play things in background on other things. One good example of a background cuelist might be something like a hazer or other backstage lights that you want to have on their own cuelist. I could still have that playing. I could still cycle through that. So for example, on a hazer cuelist, and we'll probably do this more later, I like to do a 3-step cuelist that has my hazer on low, medium, high, or low, medium, off. I can have that playing on its own playback and continue to go, but I'm always going to look at this screen right here. And in Vista, I can put this screen as its own window. So I can add a dockable window for a playback. If you're running Vista on multiple monitors, I could put that on another monitor. Also, we'd have our external windows here. So this entire area can live on another monitor somewhere. Right. Some of the other things in this window is we can also go and change what columns we're seeing here. By right-clicking on the headers, we can add or remove some of these. So if you don't need to see all that, it's easy to get rid of. Also, it's also nice in here. Let me turn that back off again. It's also nice in here is you have a notes field. So if you want to create notes on when these cues have to happen, you can add that here. And there are notes on the cue list as well. You just have to scroll it way out to see it, which is another reason why it's handy to remove some of these columns if you need to. Our next window is the output window. And what this is going to show is going to show some of the stuff. Now, for those of you that have been in our previous webinars, this is now changed to, in the R3 beta, this is now changed to a user assignable window. However, this output window itself is still here. It just has it, it's not on its own. You can add it to anything you want. So I can have an output window in here from the dockable window. So it's still an option. What's handy with the output window is it shows us what's happening right now. And I can add different views to this output window. So in this case, I added another view. And now if I change this, so there's a couple different modes. So here's a values mode. There's also a source mode. So I'm going to go to the output window too and change it to the source mode. And what this does is it's going to show me where the information for these fixtures is coming from, which cue list it's coming from. And right now I don't have anything playing. So now I can see it's coming from looks cue list, the looks cue list, and it's look 1. And now it's changing to look 2 because this is an auto follow cue list. It's just going to keep rolling. So this is a handy little spot to look at to know, hey, if something's going wrong, why is it going wrong? So for example, if I were to take those and fire those down to 0, I'm going to see that some of this stuff has been overridden. It's in a column I can't see. Oh yeah, here we go. There it is. So right now the intensity of these fixtures is in live. The color mix is still happening. You can see all that's still happening. So unfortunately, there isn't a way to really highlight that this is in live. So it'd be nice if we could do something where this kind of flashes at you and says, hey, you got something captured. But it's a great way of at least seeing what's going on. So that's a good time to ask if there's any questions that anyone has come up with so far.
We have had 0 questions.
0 questions. So that either means that I'm answering all your questions as I go, or no one's really paying attention and I'm just talking to myself, which could be the case too. I mean, I do that often. All right. Well, all right. Then moving on, there's a couple of little tricks here in with what I've done, and it's another thing that I wanted to point out, because we've been doing this in our webinars, especially in Jack's webinars, and I don't think it's really been described as to what's happening. So right now, in the bottom here, in the quick pickers, this cuelist quick picker is actually set up in a way that as soon as I press one of these, it's causing the cuelist to start firing. This can be handy if you have other little things you want to run and you don't necessarily want to put them on a playback. However, that's not the default action for this. The default action, to do that, you have to actually open the quick picker settings and then change that. So here's where I do the select to play, and blue or Alt and Control will release it. So that would be Alt Control and then click on it would release it. So this is another little handy, it's another playback tool that you have if you decide to use it and you want to have a, something playing back here. Now what will happen though too is I have to make sure that my faders are up on all this stuff, and I've put this stuff in so many different locations that I make sure all that stuff's there. So it is a handy way of doing stuff like that. All right. Gonna open this up again. I'm going to go back through here and delete a couple cues. All right, so going back to some of the, we're going to recap on some of the things that were in previous webinars. Again, working in a single cue list, there may be times I want to copy and paste things. So multiple ways of copy and pasting in Vista. I can click on a cue and I can drag and hold it and drag and drop, and I'm creating a direct copy of that. I can also create alias cues by Control C, Control Shift C, Control Shift V, and doing a paste special. I can also do that by holding my Shift key or the yellow modifier as I drag this over, and that's going to open up the paste special window. So in paste special, I've got the options: move cue, copy cue, paste only the events, the normal one, and also alias original cue. When I do the alias original cue, what it's doing is it's creating that link between these two cues. So if I change something in this cue, it's automatically changing it in that cue. So for example, if I decide to take that to green instead of the yellow, and I go back to this cue, it's going to be in that green now and not in the yellow. So alias is a great way of doing the same type of thing you want to do over and over again. I have done it with blackouts. However, sometimes that doesn't always work out as well for me, because there are times when I want to do something in a blackout that I don't want to do in other ones. If I create an alias cue, I can break the alias if I decide to. Actually, let's do it this way. If I right click on the cue, I can come down here and say remove cue alias. When I do that, now this is its own discrete cue, and this is its own discrete cue. Once I've done that, I can't put it back without deleting the cue and doing a new paste special for an alias. So when you want to remove an alias, make sure you definitely want to remove it, and it's not something that that you don't want to change. Now, what I could do is if I did have, getting into the timings of cues, if I did want to do keep an alias but make another change in that cue, I could get kind of creative with what I was doing in my cues. This is not something I have checked earlier. Let's just see here. Let's take these, kick them on. So I could have these two cues play at the exact same time. So some of the things in here is this follow. In the follow time, we have the cue timing here, and then how long it takes before this cue starts playing after this one finishes. So in this case, this goes 2 seconds. Then this one plays immediately when this is finished, and it's going to play for 2 seconds. Another option we have in here is the start time. And what this will do is this means that this timer, so to speak, starts the same time this cue starts. Now, by default, it starts at 2 seconds. So if I play this cue, it's effectively a follow cue. It's going to start 2 seconds after this one starts. If I wanted to start these both the exact same time, I can make that 0 seconds. So now both of those cues would happen exact same time. The trick with this is the reason why I bring this up is because if I did have an alias cue in here and I decided I want to change something in this one alias cue, I can't because I change it here, it's going to change it there. But say I don't want to break the alias because I still want other things to match each other. I could put another cue in here and make it a start cue and actually play these two at the same time. Now, for argument's sake, a follow time with -2 seconds does the exact same thing. As does a start with a plus time of 2 seconds is the exact same thing as a normal follow cue. What's the difference, though, is how these things decide to play. So if I make this a follow cue and it's at 0 seconds, it's going to wait till this cue's done, then it's going to play. Now, if I change this cue time to be 5 seconds, this cue's still going to wait the 5 seconds till after the 5 seconds on that one before it starts to play. But let's say I didn't want this one to, I want this to still start 2 seconds after that. Now I could do two things. I could go -3 seconds on that. So now when I play that one, it's going to wait 2 seconds and it's going to start going. Or I could change it to start and say, just wait 2 seconds after this one starts before this one starts playing. Or again, if I want them to stay the same time, I can do it this way. Oops, whoa. Let's not go that far back. The benefit to making it, if you know you want two cues to go start at the same time, the benefit to making a start is now I could freely adjust this time. So I can make this 10 seconds. If this was a follow cue, I'd have to then modify this. But because it's a start cue, these are still both going to start at the exact same time. This one will take 10 seconds. This one will take 2 seconds. Start's probably one of those overlooked things because I don't think people are familiar with halt and follow. So start has its place as well. And time code, we're definitely going to go into in another webinar because there's a lot to that. So I'm just going to say, I'm going to leave that as that. All right, so questions on that? I'm getting through many of the things that I wanted to do for this webinar. I wanted to spend a lot of time just right here in this, looking at all this stuff and looking at how you can modify cues in a single cue list. We will later on in a future webinar get into using multiple cues and commands in cues and things like that. We're not going to do that on this one. Oh, the good old, I'm looking at the questions, the good old check to see what's been used in the cues. That's a popular question. And as Jack said, it's definitely something that's on the list. There are some workarounds you can do to find out what's being used. One of the things that I like to do the most is when I'm working in the cue list and I want to look at just certain fixtures, there's some filtering I can do in the timeline. So right now, down here at the bottom are different timeline filters for what I'm looking at here. So right now we're in the all fixtures in cue list. The next one over is filter selected fixtures only. No matter where I am in the cue list, it's only going to show me the fixtures that I have selected in the chooser. So this is a way that I can go in here and I could zoom all the way out and I could see, where these fixtures are or what cues these fixtures are being used in, just those. There is some other interesting ways of filtering things using these filters up here. This is not something that I've gotten into too much myself. I haven't had the need for it. But when we do these filters, we can get in here and we can select what we want to see. So I can filter by event type. It's gonna just filter things out in the timeline. It's not actually going to give us a report of things like this. So this may or may not work on what you're trying to do. But it is something that's there. Again, I haven't used it much because I haven't gotten into that or had the need nearly as much. But I definitely understand why it's why people need it, and especially in theater programming. Oh, yeah. Something else that I definitely wanted to bring up. Oops, nope, don't do that. The selection tools. So here, there's a little trick here that I've learned in my days of programming in theater too, and doing things that, especially when I've been, again, sometimes I'm lazy and I don't do block cues either. And when I don't do block cues, it's because I've completely forgotten, or I'm programming like basically in real time during rehearsal, and I don't get the time to add the block in there. There's another selection tool that I can do to grab any fixture that's active. It's one of my favorite ones, and actually I think it's one of the ones that I used to use in Vista 1 too, going way back. Let's go to this one. So these fixtures haven't been used in this at all. And I took that block out so that I can see that, hey, they're hanging. Using the shift key or the modifier keys, changing my soft key options. These are the selection options of selecting different fixtures. So for example, especially in a blackout, I could go select all, and this is going to select every fixture in my show. So if I got myself in a real bind and had to turn off something real quick, but I have no idea where it is, which layout it's in, I could go and hit select all and kill them all. So that's one way of doing it. I could also do select active. And what select active is going to do is it's going to pick up whatever the last things I was using. Select programmed shows me whatever I've programmed in here already. And invert selection is going to then, if I got everything selected, then invert, it's going to show me everything else. So the select active is the one that I like to use quite a bit, because what it will do is it's going to grab the fixtures that are currently active in this queue, the ones that I forgot to turn off, and I can then turn them off. So that's a handy one. Again, it's something that's probably not actually ever brought up. It has its place, and when you need it, it's perfect for what you need. So I'm coming toward the end of what I've got for this webinar. We'll open up for any more questions that anyone has. Yeah, the alias is a great function to have in there, especially if you're using the same looks over and over again. It's ideal for doing a front stage look. If you're dialing in, what your profiles are hitting on the performers. Yeah, in the start, and we're gonna get, when we do the time code, we'll show some more stuff in with cue layouts and what you can do there. Starts and follows work right hand in hand. I mean, they can work in any cue list, but they also work in hand with time coded cue lists, where you don't necessarily have to time code every single cue in the list. You can use your follows and your starts to kind of let things do their own thing. And what that does is it lets you play a single cue, then watch the sequence happen after that without having time code running the entire time. I can't give too much away on the time code because there's a lot there. There's a lot to it. Anybody have any questions on the console setup? That was something that was brought up in our last webinar. Wanted to look at console a little bit more. Creating presets. Yeah, you can create presets with the timeline, or sorry, with the command line. It'd just be like recording anything else. So I'd say store and do preset. And I believe we did presets yesterday. And we will be doing more about the command line. There is a lot more in the command line.
You can always check out the YouTube channel as well. I did a few more tips and tricks in my video, my session this morning, so you can always check that out as well. They should be live early next week.
Yes, Jack, you use the command line much more than I use the command line. And it's not a bad thing. It's just I go much more visual.
That's because I'm used to programming shows with just my laptop and running around the place. So keyboard warrior.
The nice thing, and actually that's kind of a great point here too, is, the nice thing about this command line in Vista is that you don't have to use it at all. It's just another way of doing things, and it's kind of a hybrid thing here too. So, I mean, as I do things here, actually, let me go back to as I grab things here, it shows up in the command line what I'm selecting. So I can select things here. I could select things, let's see where we got 21 through 25. Down here at the same time, I can do hybrid things with doing all that stuff. So command line is just another way of doing kind of the same functions you already do in Vista. So it's you don't need to get you don't need to get scared of the fact that there's a command line available to you. All right. Any other questions? This is obviously a little bit of a shorter webinar because we kind of pared down the topic to something very specific. I'm actually kind of surprised I went as long as I did. I tried to slow down because I do go fast. So I guess if there are any other questions, we'll wrap this up. Jack, do you have any questions? Any questions on your end that we need to cover?
Nope.
All right. Well, in that case, thank everybody for joining us. Couple of things of housekeeping. As Jack said, we'll upload these videos to our YouTube channel later on. What you said, next week, early next week. Tomorrow we'll announce what our topics for the next week's webinars will be. We're going to do the same times next week, so Wednesday and Thursday. Couple new topics. I know the second one will be going into a little more of the programming. So we do basically a feature in the first webinar, then the next one we do how to use it, so to speak. So so stay tuned for that, and that will go out tomorrow. So, and if that's it, and there are no other questions, then we'll wrap this up, and thank you all for attending.